It's the week after Thanksgiving, and you know what that means. Time to deal with leftovers. Now, most of my leftovers are actually gone. Between sending them home with family and having a partner that just loves Thanksgiving food, all of the mashed potatoes, stuffing, Brussels sprouts, things like that, they're pretty much eaten. But I do have one thing left: squash. Hi, I'm Val from Very Vegan Val, and I'm gonna take my leftover Thanksgiving squash and turn it into a couple of freezer-friendly meal preps. Specifically, I think I'm going to make a cheesy squash sauce and some squash gnocchi, and then freeze them for later on when maybe I don't feel like cooking quite as much. Now, in case you're wondering how we got here, my mother managed to buy a 30-something pound Hubbard squash, gigantic, for $5. So naturally, she brought it to Thanksgiving. We smashed it open.
Woohoo! Applause!
And that is my little sister in the background demanding applause. And then we roasted the two halves. And while we made a delicious pumpkin soup, there's still quite a lot of squash left. So today we're gonna be processing my portion of the leftover squash. It's all roasted, it just needs to be scooped from squash pieces. So that's what I'm gonna get up to first. And there we go. I'm just gonna mash it all up just to make it a little bit more even. I'm gonna go walk the dog, but you don't need to know that. I'm gonna start by making our cheesy squash sauce. Got about 3 cups of squash. And I'm gonna add about a 1/4 cup of fermented tofu. If you don't have access to fermented tofu, you could also use miso paste. We're just going for something that's sort of salty and funky. Next, I'm gonna add about a 1/4 cup of nutritional yeast. That looks right. We'll pop in a couple cloves of garlic. And then about a cup of oat milk. You can use any type of plant-based milk or water if you prefer. Now I'm just gonna blend until it's perfectly smooth and creamy. Good. I'm gonna add just a little bit more salt and then some oil for some richness. I added about a 1/4 cup of oil and then a little pepper. And I'm just gonna add a wee bit of these red chili flakes as well. There's a lot of things you can add to this if you like chili flakes. You can add a smoked paprika for a bit of a smoky flavor in your sauce. Truffle oil is really delicious when you add it. I like adding shallots. You can add other vegetables too if you want like a little variety. You can add some carrots, you can add some potato, sweet potato of course. All right, I'm gonna give this another blend. So it is thick, it is creamy. I'm gonna give it a little sample on these pretzels. It is sweet, it is creamy, it is delicious. If I have a squash that doesn't have a particularly good flavor, like sometimes you'll get a squash that's almost a little bit more watery or bitter, I will often make a sauce like this, but I'll just amp up the amount of nutritional yeast and fermented tofu even more. And it tastes even more cheesy, although less squashy. This was a really good squash, so I like the balance that I've struck here between the squash flavor and the cheesy flavor. Another thing I do like to add to this sometimes is sage. Sage pairs so well with squash, but for today, I think I'm gonna call it. Now I do most often use this with noodles as like a mac and cheese. I'll just like boil some noodles and throw some chopped kale in the water as well, strain it, and then put this sauce on top. But it's also really good for like a nacho cheese or something like that. And there we go. 3 easy nights of mac and cheese for future Val. We'll just pop them in the freezer. Now for this recipe, you're gonna need squash, flour, salt, and some xanthan gum. Now, this is perhaps an ingredient you don't have in your kitchen, and I don't think you actually strictly need it for this recipe, but xanthan gum does act as like a thickening agent and a binding agent. So it's gonna help our gnocchi stick together. If you don't have any, honestly, I think it will be fine. This is just how I make it, so I'm gonna show you my method. Now, the basic recipe we're gonna do is 1 cup of squash, 1 cup of flour, 1/2 teaspoon of salt, and 1/2 teaspoon of xanthan gum. And I'm gonna probably do about 4 of those recipes. So that times 4. It looks like I actually have enough to do 5 times this recipe, so I'm gonna multiply it by 5. We have roughly 5 cups of flour. And then we want 2.5 teaspoons of xanthan gum, which is just under a tablespoon. 1/2 teaspoon short of a tablespoon. And the same of salt. I'm gonna just mix the salt and the xanthan gum into the flour on top first. And then we're gonna start incorporating it all together. And as you do this, it will definitely feel like it's way too dry and that it's never gonna come together, but I assure you it will. Our goal is not to like really work this dough. It's just to sort of coat all the squash in flour. So we're just gently working our dough, making sure that I almost like squeeze the squash to make sure that there aren't any chunks without incorporated flour. And I find that about a cup's worth of squash gives you a good amount of gnocchi, like a large amount for 1 person or a small serving for 2. Lightly flour my work surface. Lightly flour my hands. And then we're just gonna very briefly knead this so we can get some uniform texture. I think that this is already pretty much good. Just gonna portion out into some workable sections. I would say about the size of a snowball. The next thing we're gonna do is we're gonna take one of our balls and roll it out into a snake. Again, if your work surface isn't floured at this point, you may run into some issues. And then just divide them into small pieces. You can leave them like this, that's perfectly fine. Or you can shape them a little bit with a fork. So how I like to do it is to pinch it just a little bit into a little bit more of a uniform shape and then roll it down the back of the fork. It will get this little divot in the center and you can almost just kind of pinch it closed and then it will get the ridges on top, and they don't need to be perfect. Once the pasta is done, I'm gonna take it and place it on a baking sheet lined with a silicone mat or wax paper and set it aside. You wanna make sure that your pastas are not touching on the mat. You can see that sometimes my gnocchi kind of stick to the fork. Like all things, that can be fixed with flour. All right, 1 roll done, 16 more to go. I did this first tray and it's pretty much full, so I'm just gonna pop it into the freezer and freeze them until they're totally solid. And then you can take them off the tray and portion them into bags or containers. I think enough is enough. I'm gonna stop putting the ridges in my gnocchi. Laziness shall prevail. And these are cute too. Off to the freezer. So, I only made it through about half of the dough, but I also have no more space in my freezer for large baking sheets. So I'm gonna take a break, let those ones freeze, bag them up, and then do the rest of the dough. I don't think you guys need to really be here with me for that. So before we leave, I'm just gonna make myself a little lunch. I set aside a few of these in gnocchi, and I'm gonna be making those. I'm gonna do like the simplest preparation I can think of, and it will be delicious. I'm gonna take my bowl and add a scoop of butter, Earth Balance. Next, I'm gonna use some vegan Parmesan. I'm using the Trader Joe's one, which it's not my favorite, but it is my favorite at Trader Joe's. And I'm just gonna add a nice pinch of that. And then just microwave this until it's all melted, probably about a minute. I'm gonna go ahead and salt this water. We're just gonna add the gnocchi right to the boiling water. And this is the same way I'm gonna do it once they're frozen. Depending on the amount you're cooking, you may need to go in batches. I think these will all fit. Once they start to float to the top, skim them off with a slotted spoon. And then plop them directly in that butter and vegan parm. Cute, yeah? Something that makes me a lot happier when I'm eating is just having like little bits on top. So I'm gonna finally chop some parsley. And then for just that little added something something, I'm gonna add a tiny bit of this chili crisp. Bon appetit. You still get a lot of squash flavor in these gnocchi, which I really love. They're soft and they're pillowy and they almost fall apart in your mouth, but not in the pasta water, which is very important. I love the added umami from the vegan parm and the richness from the butter, that little bit of crunch from our chili crunch, and then of course the freshness from the parsley. All of those things are like really simple but put together with the sweetness of these little squash gnocchi. It's beautiful. And you know, that's all I really have for you guys today. I hope you enjoyed dealing with my Thanksgiving leftovers with me, and hopefully this gave you a little bit of inspiration for your own squash cooking. If you liked this video, I would really appreciate if you gave the video a thumbs up and shared your favorite dish for leftover squash in the comments below. If you want to see next time we post, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications. Until next time, bye-bye.